On November 3, 1987, 17-year-old Sarah Hendricks descended the basement stairs of her family's suburban Virginia home to retrieve Christmas decorations and discovered a world that would force her to question everything she believed about her father, her country, and the line between patriotism and treason. What she found in the soundproofed room behind the water heater would reveal that her childhood had been built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies, and that the man who taught her to ride a bicycle had spent 23 years teaching strangers how to betray their nations. When the people you love most are not who they claim to be, and when stopping them means destroying your family, what choice remains? The answer would cost Sarah everything she thought she knew about loyalty. The house at 2847 Oakmont Circle in Falls Church, Virginia, was built in 1964, a split-level colonial with white aluminum siding and black shutters that matched 17 other homes on the same curved street. In the autumn of 1987, it belonged to the Hendricks family. Robert, 46, who worked for what he described as a consulting firm that contracted with the State Department. Catherine, 43, a part-time librarian at the Fairfax County Public Library, and their daughter Sarah, 17, a senior at George Mason High School with a 3.8 GPA, and plans to study journalism at the University of Virginia. To their neighbors, the Hendricks family was unremarkable in every measurable way. They mowed their lawn on Saturdays, attended occasional church services at the Methodist congregation on Leesburg Pike, and kept their garbage cans neatly aligned beside the garage. Robert drove a tan 1985 Honda Accord. Catherine drove a blue 1983 Volkswagen Rabbit. Sarah drove neither, taking the school bus or catching rides with friends. It was the kind of American suburban existence that felt permanent and predictable, the kind that appeared in television commercials and political speeches about the middle class. Sarah had lived in that house since she was 4 years old. She knew its rhythms the way a sailor knows the movements of a familiar ship. She knew that the furnace kicked on at 6:15 each morning with a mechanical groan that rattled the ductwork. She knew that the refrigerator hummed in a cycle that peaked every 11 minutes. She knew that the third step from the bottom of the main staircase creaked under weight, and that the bathroom faucet in the hall required exactly 2¼ turns to produce hot water without scalding. She knew these things because she had lived with them so long they had become invisible, the background texture of her daily life. It was this familiarity that made the anomalies noticeable when they began to accumulate in October of 1987. Small things at first, details that registered as vaguely wrong but not alarming enough to warrant immediate concern. Her father's schedule had always been irregular. He traveled frequently for work, sometimes for days at a time, and kept odd hours even when home. But in October, the irregularity became patterned in a way Sarah couldn't initially articulate. He would leave the house at 7:30 in the morning, dressed in a suit and tie, carrying his briefcase. Normal. But he would return at 2:45 in the afternoon, park in the garage, and remain inside the house until 9 train or 10 hour at night when he would leave again, this time wearing casual clothes, jeans, a windbreaker, sometimes a baseball cap. He would return around midnight or 1 a.m., entering through the side door that led directly to the basement rather than through the main entrance. Sarah first noticed this pattern on October 6th, when she stayed home sick from school with a fever and spent the day on the living room, couch watching soap operas and game shows. She heard her father's car in the garage at 2:47 p.m., heard his footsteps descending the basement stairs, and heard nothing else for the next 6 hours. No television sounds from the basement, no footsteps ascending for dinner, no shower running, just silence, broken occasionally by a sound she couldn't quite identify. A low mechanical hum, faint but persistent, that seemed to emanate from somewhere below the house. The basement had always been her father's domain. It contained the standard suburban inventory: a washer and dryer, a water heater, storage shelves lined with Christmas decorations and old tax documents, a workbench cluttered with tools, cardboard boxes filled with Sarah's childhood toys, and a space heater that her father used during the winter months when he worked at his desk in the corner. The desk faced the wall and held a computer, an IBM clone with a green monochrome monitor that her father used for what he described as work-related correspondence and analysis. Sarah had been down there hundreds of times over the years, fetching laundry or retrieving holiday decorations or looking for old photographs. It was not a mysterious place. It smelled of detergent and concrete and the faint mustiness that came with below-ground spaces in humid Virginia autumns. But the sound she heard on October 6th was different. It was not the washer or dryer. It was not the water heater cycling on. It was something else, something mechanical and deliberate, and it seemed to be coming from a location she couldn't quite pinpoint. She stood at the top of the basement stairs, listening, trying to triangulate the source. The door to the basement was open, as it usually was during the day, and weak light from the single bulb at the bottom of the stairs cast long shadows across the concrete floor below. She considered descending to investigate, but something stopped her. An instinct she couldn't name. A vague sense that she would be intruding on something private. Her father had never explicitly forbidden her from entering the basement when he was working, but he had established an unspoken boundary through years of subtle discouragement. A closed door, a request for privacy, a mild irritation when interrupted. Sarah had learned to respect that boundary without questioning why it existed. The second anomaly occurred on October 12th, a Monday evening. Sarah was in her bedroom studying for a calculus exam when she heard a car pull into the driveway around 9:30 p.m. This was not unusual in itself. Her father often had colleagues visit for brief meetings. But when she glanced out her window, she saw that the car had not parked in the driveway at all. It had pulled around to the side of the house, near the basement's exterior door, an entrance that was rarely used except for moving large items in and out of storage. Two men emerged from the car, both wearing dark clothing, neither carrying anything that resembled a briefcase or the typical accoutrements of a business meeting. One was tall and thin with graying hair. The other was shorter, stockier, younger. They moved quickly and deliberately to the basement door, which opened before they could knock, suggesting her father had been watching for them. Sarah turned off her bedroom light and watched from behind the curtain. The men disappeared inside. The door closed. The car remained parked beside the house for 47 minutes. Sarah checked her digital clock repeatedly. And when the men emerged, they moved with the same quick efficiency, glancing briefly toward the street before entering their vehicle and driving away, without turning on their headlights until they reached the end of Oakmont Circle. Over the following week, Sarah began paying attention with an intentionality she had never applied to her father's activities before. She noticed that her mother seemed carefully oblivious to the late-night visits and irregular schedule, maintaining a performance of normalcy that felt increasingly deliberate. When Sarah asked about her father's work over dinner on October 15th, casually, as if making conversation, her mother's response was smooth and practiced. He was consulting on communication systems for State Department facilities overseas. It required irregular hours. It was intellectually demanding, but not dangerous. Sarah should focus on her college applications and not worry about adult concerns. The answer was delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach her mother's eyes. On October 19th, Sarah heard sounds from the basement at 2:30 in the morning. She had been awake, unable to sleep, reading by the small lamp beside her bed. The sounds were distinct enough to carry through the floor. Voices, muffled but multiple, speaking in tones too low to distinguish words. Then came other sounds, Footsteps, the scraping of furniture, and that same mechanical hum she had heard weeks earlier, now more pronounced. She crept to her bedroom door and opened it slowly, careful to avoid the squeaking hinge. The hallway was dark. Light from the basement stairs created a pale rectangle on the floor near the kitchen. She could hear her father's voice now, giving instructions in a tone she had never heard him use before. Authoritative, cold, methodical. Not the voice of the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle or helped her with algebra homework. The voice of someone else entirely. Sarah retreated to her room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling until the sound stopped around 4:09 a.m. She did not sleep. When morning came and her father appeared at breakfast, dressed in his suit, eating toast and drinking coffee while reading the Washington Post, the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This man, sitting at the kitchen table discussing the Redskins' chances in the upcoming game against the Cowboys, was the same man who had been awake in the basement 4 hours earlier, speaking in that strange voice, doing something that required multiple visitors and mechanical equipment and total secrecy. On November 3rd, both of her parents left the house at 6 p.m. to attend what her father described as a diplomatic reception at the State Department, a function that required formal attire and would last until at least 10:80 p.m. Sarah was expected to stay home, study for her upcoming SAT retake, and call if she needed anything. She agreed with the dutiful compliance she had perfected over 17 years. She watched from the living room window as her father's Honda backed out of the driveway, her mother visible in the passenger seat, wearing a dark blue dress and pearls. She watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner of Oakmont Circle. Then Sarah Hendricks walked to the basement door and descended the stairs for the first time with the deliberate intention of discovering what her father was hiding. The basement looked exactly as it always had, unremarkable, cluttered with the accumulated debris of suburban family life, lit by the harsh illumination of a single fluorescent fixture that hummed with its characteristic 60-cycle buzz. Sarah stood at the bottom of the stairs and conducted a systematic visual survey, the way she imagined a detective might examine a crime scene. Washing machine and dryer against the north wall, both older models with chipped enamel surfaces. Water heater in the northeast corner, wrapped in a faded insulation blanket. Storage shelves along the east wall, sagging slightly under the weight of cardboard boxes labeled in her mother's precise handwriting. Christmas ornaments, Sarah, baby clothes. Tax records, 1979-1983. Her father's workbench occupied the south wall, its pegboard backing displaying tools in organized rows, screwdrivers arranged by size, wrenches hanging on dedicated hooks. A red metal toolbox sitting open with compartments containing nails, screws, and various fasteners. But Sarah had developed an observer's eye over the past 3 weeks, trained through repetition to notice details that previously would have registered as background noise. She saw now that the concrete floor, while appearing uniformly gray, showed subtle variations in texture and color. Most of the floor exhibited the slightly rough surface typical of troweled concrete from the 1960s, but a rectangular section along the west wall, approximately 8 feet wide and 12 feet long, displayed a smoother finish, as if it had been re-poured or resurfaced more recently. The workbench, which she had always assumed was positioned against the south wall for convenience, now appeared deliberately placed to obstruct the view of that western section from anyone descending the stairs. She moved toward the west wall, her sneakers making soft, squeaking sounds on the concrete. Behind the workbench, partially hidden by shadows and the angle of the fluorescent light, she found what she was looking for: a door. Not the exterior basement door her father's visitors used, which was visible and obvious, but a second door built into the wall itself, painted the same industrial beige as the surrounding concrete blocks, with a handle so flush-mounted it was nearly invisible. There was no keyhole, but beside the handle she noticed a small metal plate, approximately 2 inches square, that looked like it might conceal an electronic lock. Sarah had never seen this door before. Or rather, she had seen it countless times over the years without recognizing it as a door. The human brain excels at filtering out patterns it considers irrelevant, and Sarah realized with uncomfortable clarity that she had been conditioned, through years of subtle behavioral cues and unspoken boundaries, not to look at this section of the basement too carefully. Her father worked at his desk in the corner. Her mother did laundry. Sarah fetched holiday decorations from the shelves along the opposite wall. No one had any reason to examine the west wall closely, and so no one did. She reached for the handle. It didn't move. The electronic lock, if that's what the metal plate concealed, required some kind of code or key card she didn't possess. She examined the door frame more carefully, running her fingers along the edges, and discovered that the frame was reinforced with steel plates barely visible beneath a thin coating of paint. This was not a standard interior door. This was something designed to prevent forced entry, something built to contain sound or maintain security, or both. Sarah stepped back and surveyed the rest of the basement with new suspicion. What else had she failed to notice? The electrical panel on the east wall caught her attention. She walked over and opened the metal cover, exposing rows of circuit breakers labeled in faded handwriting. Most were standard: kitchen outlets, upstairs bedrooms, garage. But 4 breakers at the bottom of the panel bore no labels at all, and their amperage ratings, 50 amps each, far exceeded anything necessary for normal household circuits. She did the mathematics in her head, remembering what she had learned in her physics class about electrical consumption. 4 50-amp circuits at 240 volts provided 48 kilowatts of available power, enough to run industrial equipment or a small commercial facility. The power consumption Frank Delgado had noticed in apartment 4F suddenly made perfect sense in a different context. Over the following 3 weeks, from October 13th through November 2nd, Sarah maintained the appearance of normal teenage life while conducting a systematic investigation of her father's activities. She established a documentation protocol, recording observations in a spiral-bound notebook she kept hidden between her mattress and box spring. Each entry was dated and time-stamped, written in the abbreviated shorthand she had developed for taking notes during history lectures. She recorded her father's comings and goings with forensic precision: departure times, return times, clothing worn, any carried items, visible mood or behavior, and any unusual events. The pattern became clear within days. Her father left each weekday morning dressed for office work, but returned by mid-afternoon, changed clothes, and descended to the basement, where he remained until late evening. Approximately 3 times per week, visitors arrived after dark, always using the exterior basement entrance, always staying between 40 minutes and 2 hours, always leaving with the same careful attention to their surroundings that suggested counter-surveillance awareness. Sarah learned to recognize the sound of the exterior door's hinges, which produced a distinctive metallic groan slightly different from any other sound in the house. She learned that her father played classical music, always Bach, always the same Glenn Gould recording of the Goldberg. Variations. When visitors were present, the volume calibrated precisely to mask conversation without being so loud as to draw attention. On October 21st, she positioned herself in the side yard after dark, concealed behind the rhododendron bushes that lined the house's foundation, and watched as 2 men arrived at 9:47 p.m. One was the tall, thin man with graying hair she had seen before. The other was new, younger, perhaps 30, with the kind of athletic build that suggested military training or serious physical fitness regimen. They knocked twice, paused, knocked once, paused again, then knocked 3 times in rapid succession, a pattern that Sarah recognized as a prearranged signal. Her father opened the door within seconds, as if he had been standing just inside waiting. The men entered. The door closed. Sarah remained in the bushes for the next hour and 17 minutes, shivering in the October night air, watching the exterior door and the small basement window that faced the side yard. The window was covered from inside by what appeared to be black fabric or paper, but occasionally she could detect light seeping around the edges when shadows moved within. She heard nothing. The soundproofing, whatever its composition, was evidently effective. At 11:04 p.m., the door opened, the two men emerged, and Sarah watched as they walked to their car, a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice with no distinguishing features she could identify in the darkness, and drove away with the same lights-off procedure she had observed before. The shortwave radio transmissions proved more difficult to document. Sarah first became aware of them on October 24th, a Saturday night when her parents were both home and presumably asleep. She had been lying awake reading when she heard a sound from somewhere in the house that didn't match any familiar pattern, a rapid series of tones, almost musical, but too structured to be music, lasting perhaps 15 seconds before stopping abruptly. She got out of bed and moved into the hallway, listening, trying to determine the source. The sound repeated, a burst of electronic tones, rhythmic but not melodic, transmitted at a frequency that suggested radio rather than telephone. It was coming from the basement. Sarah had taken a communications technology elective the previous semester and remembered learning about various radio transmission modes. What she was hearing sounded like radio teletype, or a digital encoding scheme, the kind used by military or intelligence services to transmit data in compressed formats that were difficult to intercept or decode. She stood at the basement door, listening as the transmissions continued at irregular intervals. Silence for 3 minutes, then a 15-second burst, then silence again for 7 minutes, then another burst. This continued until 2:30 a.m., when the transmissions finally ceased and she heard her father's footsteps ascending the basement stairs. She had retreated to her bedroom, seconds before her door would have been visible from the hallway. On October 27th, Sarah decided to research her father's employer. He had always described his work in vague terms: consulting on communication systems, analysis for State Department contracts, occasional travel to assess overseas facilities, but had never provided a company name or specific job title. She found his business card in the desk organizer, where her mother kept important documents. The card was simple: Robert Hendricks, senior consultant, with a phone number bearing a 703 area code and an address on Wilson Boulevard in Arlington. No company name, no logo, no email address, which was becoming standard on business cards by 1987. She called the number from a payphone outside the 7-Eleven on Leesburg Pike, using quarters from her allowance and disguising her voice as best she could. A woman answered on the third ring. Federal Systems Research. Sarah asked to speak with Robert Hendricks. The woman said Mr. Hendricks was not in the office today. Could she take a message? Sarah said no thank you and hung up. She looked up Federal Systems Research in the Fairfax County phone directory. No listing. She tried the Washington Metropolitan Area Directory at the library. No listing. She called directory assistance. No listing for any business with that name in Virginia, Maryland, or the District of Columbia. The address on Wilson Boulevard was real. Sarah took the bus to Arlington on November 1st and found the building, a nondescript 3-story structure with dark glass windows and a small lobby containing no tenant directory. The main entrance required a key card for access. She waited across the street for 40 minutes but saw no one enter or exit the building. When she asked at the sandwich shop next door if they knew what businesses operated in that building, the clerk shrugged and said he'd never paid attention. Sarah's mother presented a different kind of mystery. Catherine Hendricks maintained her routines with an almost mechanical consistency. Library shifts on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, grocery shopping on Friday afternoons, book club on the second Wednesday of each month, church most Sundays. She cooked dinner at 6:30 p.m. on nights when Robert was home, served meals with pleasant conversation about Sarah's school activities and current events, and cleaned the kitchen afterward while listening to NPR on the small radio beside the sink. But Sarah noticed that her mother never asked Robert about his work with any specificity, never expressed curiosity about his late nights or unusual visitors, never mentioned the sounds from the basement or the irregular schedule that would concern any normal spouse. The carefully maintained ignorance felt deliberate, performed, a role Catherine had been playing for so long it had become indistinguishable from reality. On November 2nd, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Her best friend, Monica Chen, lived 4 blocks away in a similar split-level colonial with similar white siding and similar black shutters. Monica's father, David Torres, was a special agent with the FBI's Washington Field Office, assigned to the Counterintelligence Division. Sarah had known this for years. Monica mentioned it occasionally, usually in the context of explaining why her father couldn't discuss his work at dinner parties, but had never considered it relevant to her own life until now. She went to Monica's house after school on November 2nd and asked if they could talk privately. They went to Monica's bedroom, where Sarah laid out everything she had observed over the past 3 weeks: the irregular schedule, the late-night visitors, the sounds from the basement, the locked door, the excessive electrical consumption, the shortwave transmissions, the non-existent employer. She showed Monica her notebook with its detailed timestamps and observations. She explained her growing certainty that her father was involved in something that went far beyond consulting work for the State Department. Monica listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Monica asked one question: "Do you think he's a spy?" Sarah had not allowed herself to articulate that specific fear, but hearing it spoken aloud made something crystallize in her mind. "I don't know what he is," she said, "but I know he's lying. And I know whatever he's doing in that basement, it's not legal." Monica's expression shifted from concern to something harder to read. "My father has talked about things," she said carefully. "Not specifics, but general things. About how Soviet intelligence runs operations in the United States. About false front companies and legends and training facilities." She paused. "If what you're describing is real, if your father is really running some kind of operation out of your basement, you need to understand that this isn't just about your family. This could be about national security." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "I know," she said. "My father comes home tonight around 7, Monica said. "You should talk to him, not officially, just conversation. Tell him what you've seen. Let him decide if it matters." Sarah nodded, though the weight of what she was about to set in motion felt suddenly overwhelming. She was 17 years old, a high school senior worried about SAT scores and college acceptance letters and whether Brad Morrison would ask her to prom. And now she was preparing to report her own father to the FBI because she suspected he was training spies in their basement. The evening sun was already beginning its descent toward the Virginia horizon when Sarah walked home from Monica's house, the autumn air carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighborhood fireplaces and the distant sound of children playing in yards before dinner time. Falls Church, Virginia looked exactly as it always had: safe, suburban, ordinary. But Sarah Hendricks understood now that ordinariness could be a disguise, that the most dangerous secrets often hid in plain sight, protected by nothing more than the human tendency to see what they expected to see and ignore everything else. The house felt different when empty. Sarah stood in the kitchen at 6:07 p.m. on November 3rd, listening to the silence that follows departure. Her parents had left precisely at 6 o'clock, her father in a charcoal suit, her mother in the dark blue dress and pearls. Sarah had watched from the living room window as the Honda's taillights disappeared, then waited an additional 7 minutes before moving, a precaution born from observing her father's tradecraft. At 6:14 p.m., she descended to the basement. The tools she needed were in her father's workbench: a flathead screwdriver, a small pry bar, a flashlight with fresh batteries. She had studied the locked door during her previous reconnaissance, noting the flush-mounted handle and the small metal plate concealing what she assumed was an electronic lock. But when she removed the plate using the screwdriver, she found beneath it not an electronic keypad, but a simple mechanical latch. The electronic security was theater, a deterrent that made the door appear more sophisticated than it was. She inserted the pry bar and applied pressure. The latch gave way with a soft click. She pulled the door open and entered a room that contradicted everything she understood about her father and her family. The space was approximately 12 feet wide and 20 feet deep. The walls were covered with acoustic foam panels in dark gray, their pyramidal surfaces designed to absorb sound. The floor was industrial vinyl tile. Recessed LED fixtures produced cold, even illumination. The room had no windows. The air smelled of electronics and paper and gun oil. Equipment racks lined the left wall. 6 radio receivers, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, signal processing devices. A photography station occupied one corner, a copy stand with professional lighting, a 35mm camera developing trays. Her father processed film here rather than using commercial labs. The right wall held a teaching station. A corkboard displayed laminated instruction sheets, dead drop protocols, surveillance detection routes, cover for action, emergency communications. Beside it, a pegboard held items from spy novels made real, hollowed-out coins, a pen with hidden compartments, fake identification cards, lockpicks arranged by size. A metal desk occupied the center, its surface organized with systematic precision. On it sat an IBM Selectric typewriter surrounded by neat stacks of paper. Sarah examined the top sheet without touching it. It was a training assessment form, evaluating skills no school would teach. Lockpicking, tumbler, document photography, low light, dead drop service, urban, cover maintenance, extended duration. Each skill was rated 1 to 5, with comments in her father's handwriting: shows improvement in speed but needs work on subtlety. Ready for field deployment. The student files were in a locked cabinet beside the desk. Sarah used the pry bar again and opened the top drawer. Manila folders, each labeled with a name and number: Petrov, Mikhail, Asset 247, Chen, David, Asset 251, Rodriguez, Elena, Asset 255. She opened the first folder. Mikhail Petrov, 34 years old, photograph showing a man with Slavic features, dark hair, intense eyes, born in Leningrad, defected 1984, current cover, graduate student at George Mason University. Training commenced March 1985, operational assignment, penetration of Soviet scientific community in Moscow. The file contained biographical details, psychological assessments, training progress reports, mission parameters. Sarah photographed the file with her Minolta camera working quickly. She moved through more files, documenting everything. David Chen, recruited 1983, trained for East Germany operations. Elena Rodriguez, recruited 1986, prepared for Cuba insertion. Some files contained mission reports. Asset 247 had been inserted into Moscow in November 1986. His last communication was March 1987. A handwritten note in red ink. Communication ceased. Status unknown. Presumed compromised. Asset 239 was listed as captured, executed, Warsaw, January 1987. She documented weapons cabinets, disguise materials, foreign currency, maps of Eastern European cities, training manuals covering covert photography and resistance to interrogation. She had been in the room 38 minutes when she made her critical error. Photographing the last file, crouched beside the cabinet, She shifted her weight and felt something beneath the vinyl tile give slightly, accompanied by a soft electronic click that froze her blood. A pressure sensor. The room was monitored. She had triggered an alert. Sarah grabbed her camera and exited quickly. She pulled the door closed, realized she couldn't replace the metal plate without the specialized screws. Evidence of entry, unmistakable and unavoidable. She returned the tools to the workbench and climbed the stairs. In the kitchen, 6:54 p.m., 3 hours, maybe 4, before her parents returned. Sarah sat at the kitchen table in the empty house and understood she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The photographs in her camera represented evidence of something she couldn't fully articulate. Was her father serving his country or operating outside legal authority? Were his students patriots or being sent to their deaths? She sat as darkness gathered outside and waited for her father to come home. Robert Hendricks received the alert at 6:52 p.m., his pager vibrating twice, indicating intrusion detection. He found a secure phone and confirmed pressure sensor activation at 6:51 p.m. Someone was in the room. Catherine was visible 30 feet away. That left only one possibility. They were home by 7:34 p.m. Sarah was at the kitchen table with an SAT prep book, but her posture was wrong, too rigid. "You're home early," Sarah said. "I need to check something in the basement," Robert said. The evidence was immediate. Metal plate removed, screws on the workbench, file cabinet forced open, scuff marks near the pressure sensor. He spent 7 minutes documenting, then returned to the kitchen. "Sarah," Robert said, sitting across from her, "I need you to tell me what you did this evening." The silence lasted 5 seconds. "I was in the room," Sarah said finally. "What did you see?" "Everything. The equipment, the files, the mission reports. I know what you've been doing. I know some of them have died." "Did you photograph anything?" "Yes. The film is still in my camera." Robert considered his options with analytical precision. His daughter possessed evidence that could compromise operations spanning continents, but the protocols had been written for external threats, not for 17-year-old daughters. "I'm going to tell you some things," Robert said. "The organization I work for operates with tacit approval from elements within the intelligence community. We train individuals, mostly Soviet defectors, for deep cover intelligence gathering in hostile territories. The people whose files you saw provide intelligence that helps prevent nuclear war by ensuring both sides understand each other's actual capabilities." "And the deaths?" Sarah asked quietly. "Intelligence work is dangerous. The people I train know the risks. Some have been captured. Some have been executed. Those outcomes are tragedies, but they don't change the necessity of the work." "Who decides it's necessary?" Sarah asked. "You?" "The decision was made by people far above my level. I'm a training officer. I prepare assets for authorized operations, but I believe what I do serves a larger purpose. Asset 239, captured and executed in Warsaw. Was that person's death worth it?" Robert had no answer that would satisfy her. Intelligence operations involve acceptable risks. Not every operation succeeds, but the alternative, allowing the Soviet Union to operate without scrutiny, creates risks far greater. "That sounds like justification," Sarah said. Catherine turned from the window where she'd been standing. "Your father has been doing this work since before you were born, Sarah. I've known about it almost as long. We made a choice that this work was important enough to justify the sacrifices." "Did you know people were dying?" Sarah asked her mother. "Yes," Catherine said simply. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "That depends on what you intend to do," Robert said. "You have evidence that could expose the entire program. If you go to authorities, you'll shut down operations that took years to develop. You'll compromise assets currently in the field. You'll potentially cause deaths of people whose only crime was believing they could make a difference. Or I'll stop an illegal operation that's killing people, Sarah said. Both things can be true, Robert said. The world isn't as simple as right and wrong. I need time, Sarah said finally. I need to think about this. How much time? Days, maybe weeks. Robert shook his head. You can have until Friday. 3 days, then you need to make a decision. And if I decide to report it? Robert met his daughter's eyes with brutal honesty. Then I'll do everything in my power to discredit your evidence, protect the organization, and ensure operations continue. And our relationship will be over. Sarah held his gaze, then walked to her bedroom. Robert heard her door close, the lock engage. She's going to report it, Catherine said, crying silently. You know she will? Maybe, Robert said, or maybe she'll understand that sometimes the right choice is the one that lets you sleep at night, even if you're not sure it was actually right. He went to the basement and began documenting which files would need to be moved, which operations suspended, which contingency protocols activated if his daughter chose to destroy everything he had built. Sarah made the call to Monica's house at 4:17 p.m. on November 5th, the Friday her father had designated as her deadline. She had spent 2 days attending school mechanically, while her mind churned through consequences. Dinner with her parents had been silent, each performing normalcy while waiting for someone to break. Monica answered on the third ring. Can I come over? Sarah asked. I need to talk about that thing we discussed. Monica understood immediately. My dad's home. Come now. Special Agent David Torres was 42, a 20-year veteran of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. He met Sarah in the Chen family's living room, family photographs on the mantle, television playing muted news. Torres was compact with graying hair and the kind of stillness suggesting he spent time waiting and watching. Monica said you had concerns about someone's activities, Torres began, his voice gentle and professional. I think someone I know might be involved in unauthorized intelligence work, Sarah said, training people for operations. Some of those people have died. She withdrew an envelope containing prints, developed at a 1-hour photo shop in Arlington. I photographed everything. Torres took the envelope but didn't open it. How did you obtain access? I entered without permission. The facility is in a private residence. Whose residence? Sarah felt the weight of what she was about to do. My father's. Torres examined the photographs, equipment racks, training materials, student files, mission reports. His jaw tightened at images of files marked with red ink about captured and executed assets. How long has this been going on? He asked. Years, probably. My mother knows too. Torres leaned back, fingers steepled. There have been rumors in counterintelligence for 3 years about unauthorized training operations in Virginia suburbs. Nothing concrete, just patterns. Defectors receiving tradecraft education. Intelligence from assets we don't officially handle. These photographs give us our first hard evidence. He paused. But they create complications. Your father's organization appears to have protection. People in authority know about this and look the other way. Are you saying you won't investigate? I'm saying it's more complex than you imagine. There are people who will want this buried. And by bringing this to me, you've made yourself part of something much larger and more dangerous than family dysfunction. The FBI investigation began immediately. Sarah was interviewed 4 times in 7 days, always in secure facilities, always by different agents probing for inconsistencies. The investigation revealed Robert Hendricks had operated his facility for at least 11 years. The organization existed in bureaucratic gray zone, not officially sanctioned by CIA, but tolerated by elements who believed conventional intelligence collection was insufficient. Some individuals Robert trained were legitimate defectors, providing valuable intelligence. Others appeared involved in operations violating international law. The most disturbing discovery came November 14th, when surveillance teams reported the Hendricks residence was under observation by unknown parties. Not FBI, not CIA, someone else using professional techniques suggesting foreign intelligence services. Torres called Sarah to his office. "We believe Soviet counterintelligence has identified your father's operation. The surveillance matches KGB operational methods. They're documenting everyone entering your house, probably trying to identify assets your father trained." What does that mean? It means people whose files you photographed, currently operating in Soviet territories, are potentially compromised. Soviet intelligence might be rolling them up now, and your family is in danger. Sarah thought of Mikhail Petrov, operating in Moscow under academic cover. Was he being arrested? Interrogated? Would he be executed because she had photographed his file? "There's something else," Torres said. "We've found evidence of penetration. One of your father's students, maybe more, was a double agent. Soviet intelligence was using his operation to identify American assets." "My father trained Soviet agents?" "Your father trained people he believed were defectors. Some were actually controlled by Soviet intelligence, feeding information to Moscow about American operations." On November 17th, FBI agents arrested Robert Hendricks as he returned home. Catherine was detained for questioning. Sarah came home to an empty house with a note from Torres explaining what happened. She sat alone and felt her life collapse. Her father was not a patriot. He was, at best, a manipulated tool. At worst, criminally negligent. The Soviet surveillance continued 3 more days, then disappeared. Torres told her the team had been recalled, mission complete. In Moscow and East Berlin and Warsaw, arrests were being made. Assets were being rolled up. People were disappearing. Sarah understood she had set this in motion by choosing to photograph the files instead of pretending she had never seen them. Federal proceedings against Robert Hendricks began December 1987, conducted in closed sessions at Alexandria Federal Courthouse. Sarah testified 3 times in windowless rooms with limited attendance. Charges were complex and partially classified: unauthorized intelligence operations, failure to report security breaches, criminal negligence resulting in compromised information, and deaths of intelligence personnel. Sarah testified about her surveillance, the facility's contents, the files she photographed. Under cross-examination, defense counsel tried establishing teenage rebellion as motivation, but her detailed documentation made that difficult. The hardest testimony came identifying specific files. She spoke names of people she'd never met: Mikhail Petrov, David Chen, Elena Rodriguez. Knowing her testimony established her father's operations and resulting damage. She learned Petrov had been arrested in Moscow November 21st, 2 weeks after her facility entry. He'd been interrogated, transferred to Lefortovo prison. His status was unknown, but presumed execution or imprisonment. The revelation about Catherine came during a break. Torres explained her mother had been extensively interviewed. Catherine had known about the facility since 1976. She had known about the defectors, the missions, the deaths. She had made peace with it, believing the Cold War required moral compromises from ordinary families. "She's not being charged," Torres said. Prosecutors believe she was under her husband's influence, but her cooperation established the timeline. Sarah felt betrayed beyond the initial discovery. Her mother's complicity had been knowing, deliberate, sustained over a decade. Every normal family moment had been performed while Catherine maintained awareness of what happened in the basement. The case reached crisis in February 1988 when CIA counterintelligence briefed prosecutors on a discovery changing the charge's nature. 3 individuals Robert trained between 1983 and 1986 had been double agents, Soviet intelligence officers using Robert's training to identify American collection priorities and locate CIA officers in Eastern Europe. Information these agents provided led directly to capture and execution of at least 3 CIA officers. Robert maintained he'd been manipulated and unaware. He claimed rigorous screening, that defectors were vetted through intelligence community contacts, but investigators found records showing Robert had been warned by one student, genuine defector Yuri Sokolov, that others behaved suspiciously. Robert dismissed these concerns, believing his assessment more reliable. The evidence suggested not intentional treason, but willful negligence born from professional arrogance. Robert believed so strongly in his mission, he ignored warning signs, continued operations after red flags appeared, prioritized his training program over intelligence officer security. Resolution came March 1988. Robert accepted a plea, agreement, guilty to unauthorized operations, failure to report breaches, criminal negligence. In exchange for cooperation, providing detailed information about everyone trained, every operation, every intelligence community contact, he would receive 12 years with parole possibility after 8. Robert signed the agreement March 17th. Sarah wasn't present, but Torres informed her that day. Her father would serve his sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania, housing national security violators. The Oakmont Circle House sold May 1988. Catherine moved to a Fairfax apartment, found work at George Mason University Library. She and Sarah spoke occasionally, but never addressed the facility or imprisonment directly. Sarah graduated June 1988 with her GPA intact, despite 7 months of investigations. She was accepted to Georgetown School of Foreign Service with financial aid covering most tuition. Torres later told her certain intelligence community officials had quietly ensured favorable application consideration. She began classes September 1988, studying international relations focusing on intelligence and national security policy. Professors noticed she approached subjects with unusual gravity, particularly seminars about intelligence ethics and espionage moral complexities. She never mentioned her father to classmates, though occasionally during discussions about unauthorized operations, she contributed observations suggesting first-hand knowledge of human costs. 2 years later, October 1989, Sarah sat in her dorm watching news coverage of the Berlin Wall being dismantled. The Cold War that had justified her father's work, shaped her childhood, destroyed her family, was ending not through intelligence operations, but through popular revolution. Intelligence services had largely failed to predict. She thought about Mikhail Petrov, fate unknown, Asset 239, executed in Warsaw, CIA officers who died because 3 of her father's students were double agents, her father in prison, maintaining even now he had served his country. The lesson Sarah learned wasn't about intelligence work's necessity or immorality, but about certainty's dangers in a profession built on deception. Her father had been so convinced of his rightness, he'd become blind to being used. He confused activity with effectiveness, training with success, his sense of purpose with actual results. Sarah understood intelligence work required not just technical skills, but intellectual humility and willingness to question assumptions even when they felt most certain. The best-suited people weren't those believing most strongly in their cause, but those capable of entertaining doubt while making decisions under uncertainty. She would carry the trauma forever. Knowledge that love and loyalty could coexist with betrayal, that ordinary homes could contain extraordinary secrets, that families could be built on carefully maintained lies. These insights had aged her invisibly, but permanently. But she had chosen to study her father's world rather than reject it, to seek understanding rather than condemnation, to accept moral complexity rather than retreat into comfortable certainty. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that the Cold War required compromises from everyone it touched, and that the line between patriot and criminal was far less clear than anyone wanted to admit. In November 1989, Sarah received a letter from her father, forwarded through Torres. Brief, written in the precise handwriting she remembered from training assessment forms. He hoped she was well, understood why she did what she did, would respect her decision not to communicate. He still believed his work had been necessary, but acknowledged errors costing lives. He hoped someday she might understand people could be both wrong and well-intentioned, that failure and patriotism weren't mutually exclusive, that hardest choices often involved selecting between different kinds of wrong. Sarah read the letter twice, then placed it in a drawer where it remained, unresponded to, for 3 years. She had learned in Georgetown seminars that intelligence officers were taught to compartmentalize, to separate operational from personal lives, to function despite contradictions and moral ambiguities that would paralyze ordinary people. She understood now she'd been learning that same skill since November 1987 and would practice it for the rest of her life.